Okay, I'm going to get started. So what I'm planning on showing everybody today is um, we have a series of webinars that we've been doing the last few weeks that what they do is they compare Dynamics GP to Dynamics 365 Business Central, which is a web-based application that is looking to become the new offering that Microsoft is offering for a cloud-based ERP solution. So today, in the last couple sessions, I had done General Ledger, and the one before this, I had done, entering vendor bills, and this one I'm going to do entering vendor payments. So we're going to start in Dynamics GP, and we're going to look at talk a little bit about what we're going to accomplish in Dynamics GP. We'll create some payments. We'll look at what's in the payments, and then we'll explain how you would print to send those payments. Now, after we complete that, we'll do the same thing in Business Central. We'll talk a little bit about what the screens look like, how we create payments, and then how we print or send payments. So I'm going to get right into the application now, and I'm going to start showing you how this all works. We'll start with Dynamics GP, which I'm sure most people know by now, but just to kind of provide a contrast between what's in Business Central versus what's in GP, this is a good place to start. So I'm going to start with a build payment batch, which is a mechanism that we use to go through our open accounts payable vouchers or bills that have been put in the system and create payments as a result of those bills. So I've already prepped one, and I'm just going to bring it up. It's for a very small dollar amount, but I want to print it so you can see what it's doing. So in this batch, it's a small batch. We have a vendor called Business Equipment Center, and we're basically cutting this check of $75 for this voucher that was already entered, 57. So this is the invoice that we're paying off to this vendor. So it's a very simple process that gets done all the time, weekly, daily in Dynamics GP, that allows us to generate a check or an EFT payment to a vendor in question. So I'm just going to close that, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about, well, once we build this batch, we can go right to print payments. And if we do that, it'll basically, from here, we're just going to say, well, what's my next check number, which Dynamics GP pulls from the bank account that's associated with this check run, and then we print it, and it'll generate a computer check that we would put on our printer and send to the send to the vendor. Now, on a separate note, if this vendor was an EFT vendor, we could also, from within Dynamics GP, we can use this screen right here, which has generate EFT file, and we can go and send a file that we generate out of Dynamics GP to the bank, and we could generate the vendor. I'm sorry, the bank can pay the vendor on our behalf using ACH. So both of those both of those methods are available inside of Dynamics GP. Whether or not we want to cut a check, a paper check, via the printer and send the payment to the vendor, or we want to generate an ACH file and upload it to the bank and have the bank electronically transmit the file to the vendor. So the same functionality exists both in Dynamics GP as it does in Business Central, and I want to bring you into Business Central now and kind of contrast those features so you can see that this is how this same functionality lives in Business Central. So let's go check that out. Okay, so if you're new to Business Central, you would notice right away that Business Central looks a lot different than Dynamics GP. It's a cloud-based application that lives solely in the browser, and by launching the browser, I can go and enter and transact against my company inside of the browser. Everything is browser-based because it's a cloud application. So when we need to do the same functionality I just showed you in Dynamics GP, we are going to go into this section of Business Central, and we're going to go to something called the Payment Journal. And I'm just going to go into this AP journal, which I've set up for vendor payments. And I'm just going to delete this transaction, and I'm going to basically recreate it. So very similar to Dynamics GP in that you build a batch of payments. You do the same thing here in Business Central. So you'll come into this area called Prepare in the Payment Journal, and you will use this functionality that says Suggest Vendor Payments. In this window, you're going to say, well, this is what date do I want to pay to, and you'll set a few parameters in here that'll give you either all your payments or one transaction. So in order to basically do the same thing that I was doing in Dynamics GP, I'm narrowing this down to one vendor so we can just see one transaction. So I'm gonna click OK here. It's gonna look at all my transactions that I have in the system, and it built a payment. I had it limited down to one vendor, and it's gonna build the payment as you see here. It's looking to pay this one vendor $44.50, so $4,450. So now what we can do is we can kind of look at, okay, from here, very similar to what we just saw in Dynamics GP, I can go to this check functionality and I can print the check just like in Dynamics GP. So I can go into the bank here and I can export a payment remittance, or I can also go into the function and I could generate an EFT file just like in Dynamics GP. These things work. They have exactly the same functionality. If you want to send ACH files by generating an EFT file and submitting it to the bank, you can do that in Dynamics GP just like you could do it in Business Central, just like you could do it in Dynamics GP. So just to say that again, you come here to check. If you want to print the check, you do it from here. If you want to process, you can first things first, you would export a vendor remittance, which would email all of your vendors the remittance for the payment that you're making. And then secondly, you could, once you do that, you'd come to the function, generate EFT file, and it would go out, it would create this file, and you'd upload it to your bank, and it would work pretty much the same way it works in Dynamics GP. You upload a file to the bank then goes and transmits this information to each vendor that you have in the file. There's some detail behind the lines there, and what you would have here, if you were making payments to many vendors, there would just be multiple lines here. So line 2 would be another vendor that you'd be making a payment to, and each one of these records represents a check or a payment, depending on if you're doing ACH or a check. Okay, so now let's come back here and let's just look at this again. So we did a demo of both Dynamics GP and Business Central, and this is what we reviewed. We looked at, in Dynamics GP, we looked at creating a batch of payments or building a batch of payments, and then how to print those payments or send those payments. Then we went into Business Central and we discussed the same thing. We talked about creating a batch of payments, printing those payments, or sending those payments, depending on how you were set up with your bank. And then from there, that's basically that's the extent of the conversation I want to have today. We just want to contrast those two features of both Dynamics GP and Business Central,